Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining the Behind Company Lines podcast. Today we have Ravi Parikh, co-founder and CEO of Airplane, the developer platform for building internal tools. Ravi, I'm so excited to chat with you. Not only I was talking to you before, I have intimate experience with your previous company, being that I had a couple of roommates who worked for your previous company, Heap, and really just excited to kind of dive into your mind on how you think about enabling teams and really just offering tools that don't necessarily replace what people do, but really optimize and even kind of add additional value to. And we'll go into what I mean by that in a second here. But before we get into Airplane and what you're working on currently, what were you doing before you started the company?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, thanks so much for having me on today. So yeah, before I started Airplane, you alluded to this. I previously co-founded a company called Heap. So Heap is an analytics tool that basically helps people measure user behavior on websites, mobile apps, things like that. So I co-founded that company back in 2013 with a friend of mine from college. Both of us had been a couple of years out of college at that point, but he had sort of had the idea for the product and was kind of working on it. And he sort of pitched me on the idea and was like, hey, we should work on this together. And I was like, yeah, that sounds great. And so I did that for about 7.5 years. And we started the company towards the beginning of 2013, went through Y Combinator, raised a few rounds of funding, grew the company to, I think, about 200 people before I finally left the company in 2020. And so Heap is still around. It's, I think, roughly doubled in size since I left. So it's still doing quite well. But since then, I moved on and started a new company called Airplane.
Yeah, it's so exciting thinking about kind of how the different experiences building companies, I'm sure it was back then, going through kind of the traditional ecosystem, right? Like you got plugged into like this operating engine and essentially helped you scale to a fairly sizable amount. And then what's so different about now's environment, being that funding landscapes changed, there's more available tools and technologies. What else have you seen that's so different from building company now? Obviously experience, but what else?
Yeah, I think it is really different doing this a second time around. Almost everything feels different, but the core things feel the same. Like at the end of the day, you still have to find product market fit and build something really excellent that solves a key problem for people and improves some aspect of their lives by like a huge margin. Like those things are still the same. Achieving startup success is really in some ways not any easier or harder than it's ever been. You have to build a sort of
Yeah.
outlier product, but the things surrounding it are super different. And so when we started Heap in 2013, it was like, I think today in 2023, there is this sort of reality that like tech is the most financially successful industry in the world. The biggest companies in the world are tech companies, Google, Facebook, whatnot. That wasn't true 10 years ago. They were definitely big and they were but they were still sort of seen as up and coming. I think probably the biggest company in the world in 2013 was probably like ExxonMobil or something. And so you still sort of had a little bit of this narrative that tech was like an up and coming industry and that it was a little bit more of an underdog industry. And that narrative was changing, I think, when we started Heap, but it hadn't fully changed yet. And so as a result, I think today when you start a company, there's like a lot of like literature and advice and institutions and people who will tell you how to do it, especially if you're doing
Yeah.
something like B2B software, where there has been so many successes over the last decade. But 10 years ago when we started Heap, it was like actually a little bit more unknown. And so when we started Heap, I didn't even know the word SaaS or B2B software or cloud. Like I didn't even know what those words meant when we started the company. We just thought this is a cool problem to solve and it's a cool tool that we can build and put out there. And so we just started building it without really a ton of clue about how to monetize it or scale it. I think Mateen, my co-founder at Heap, when he actually started working on it before I joined him on it, when he was like first hacking on it, I don't even think he thought of it as a company idea. I think he thought like, hey, this would be a nifty app I could build to solve a personal pain point that I've experienced. And then he kind of pitched to some friends and they're like, hey, I would actually buy this if you turn this into a product. And then he pitched it to me and he's like, we should work on this together, maybe turn it into a company. And so like that evolution happened a little bit more organically. Whereas I think today people set out a bit more and say like, hey, I have like a clear B2B startup idea. I'm going to talk to 100 customers and validate it and all that kind of stuff. So it's a little bit more structured now. I think that's the big difference.
Well, also thinking about the category you were kind of defining, and maybe people don't consider as much, but I do in regards to how you're enabling teams. And essentially, it's like it's right as when teams were starting to purchase tools for the use of the individual kind of user, like the product teams, or if you think about sales teams getting these super robust tools to be able to actually execute these strategies. It was completely kind of nuanced in the time you were doing it. I just remember all these things coming about. And just thinking about how has it become like a standard to like enable your teams? Did you see that adopting early on, or is that something that grew as you grew the company, being that people are starting to actually purchase auxiliary tools for their team?
Yeah, it's a good question. And so basically like, yeah, so you're kind of alluding to, I think this concept of buying a tool to enable a team of people to do something is kind of now seen as like a pretty common concept, but wasn't always that way at the time. I think like, I mean, if you rewind like 30 years or 40 years back, way back before I was even in this industry or even old enough to be in this industry, I think like the way purchasing decisions were done around software were just really different than they're done today. And you had some
Yeah,
like centralized IT department who would try to like figure out what the entire company needed in
yeah,
terms of the IT stack, and you would just like use whatever they bought and stuff like that. And then you evolved to this thing where people could buy their own software, and then now you have this sort of thing where people can sort of like enable their team with software and stuff like that. So that has definitely evolved over time. And I would say that like both Heap, my previous company, my current company, Airplane, had sort of like flavors of that in terms of like the way we sort of approached the problems that we were trying to solve. And a lot of products I think have sort of mirrored that. I wouldn't say that we're unique in that respect in
right.
any way, shape, or form. But yeah.
Yeah. What's interesting about kind of building tools in the space that I guess you're not necessarily selling to the decision maker or adding value to the decision maker directly, but you're doing it through whether it's conduits like developers who are building tools internally or in Heap, product teams that are driving deliverable outcomes. How is that just overall different? And what does that change in terms of how you kind of interact with your consumer?
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I can dive into that a little bit. So Airplane is a kind of unique product. It's kind of a interesting to sell product as you alluded to, because what we do is we're selling a platform with which you can build tools, right? So we sell to developers, they buy Airplane, and then they build tools like an admin panel or a dashboard or some billing console or something like that. And then they give it to a different team, usually like a support team or a sales team or a customer success team or someone like that. Then those people can use that tool to actually do their job. And so, like you said, sometimes the actual main stakeholder of that tool is not even the people who are buying Airplane, right? There are someone like the, maybe the head of solutions engineering or something at a company. And so that is often, it depends a lot on the company. We're very inbound heavy in terms of the way we sell right now. And so what that means is like normally people are going to us and they already have some sort of like budgeted project that they're going to tie Airplane to.
Yeah.
So they're coming to us and saying like, hey, I'm on the engineering team and I'm getting pressure from our sales team to build this console that does XYZ, whatever it does. We need to show some customer data and allow people to extend the free trial and whatever. And then so I'm looking for solutions to help fix that issue. And it's already on our roadmap for this quarter. The eng team is going to spend some time on it this quarter. Airplane looks like it can help us get there faster. So like that's the best case scenario if someone comes to us with something like that. Sometimes a little bit different though. Sometimes someone will come to us and say like, I think Airplane is really cool. I'd like to be able to use it to sort of build things for other people on my team or other people at the company, but we're going to need their buy-in too. And then you got to kind of like talk to them as well. And then you have to kind of prove the value of like, hey, if you had better tooling around this thing, things would run more efficiently. So it can be kind of a complicated sell sometimes for sure.
Yeah, and what is kind of the relationship with with like in regards to why these companies are not purchasing other SaaS tools to be able to build out a CRM or sales tool? Is it to create other products within their own, or is it to kind of replace other things that aren't being serviced by these SaaS providers? What are some of the use cases you're seeing?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think like the way I think about it is like, if there's something that's common enough at every company, it's going to turn into a SaaS tool. But there's always some things that are specific to your company, right? So you might buy Salesforce as your CRM. We're not going to replace that. You might buy NetSuite as your ERP or whatever. We're not going to replace that either. But even if you bought Salesforce as your CRM, you're always going to need other things around it. You're like, well, we bought Salesforce, but the way our company does billing is really specific. We have a really specific pricing model and all that stuff. So we're going to build a really custom billing panel where you can sort of like go in and sort of see the data in a very specific way. And it pulls data from our production database in order to populate some charts and graphs or something like that. Like that's the exact sort of thing you might build in something like an Airplane versus going to a dedicated SaaS provider. And every company has this stuff. And this is like, we didn't put this study together, but I've seen studies out there that say things like, as companies scale, especially really big companies, up to like half the time that engineers spend writing code is writing code that is going to be for internal tools, right? They're not even building customer facing software or new features.
Driving
They're
revenue,
building
yeah.
these kinds of internal systems. They're building things that, so the sales team or the support team or the marketing team or whoever has some admin panel or console or workflow or something like that, that like makes some sort of internal process more efficient. And companies build more and more and more of that as they scale. And so I think that's what Airplane really tries to accelerate. Can we get those developers half their time back, essentially?
Yeah, yeah. And is part of this kind of this huge movement, at least I've seen, I run a company that's recruits for startups. And well, one thing we've seen is just this huge influx of low code, kind of no code types of tools utilized by developers. And from face value from the platform, it seems similar in the respect that you can kind of plug in almost like a white label service, but create kind of a customized system for your team. What advancement in technology recently has been able to kind of increase that? Is it like open kind of code platforms being able to congregate communities? What in particular have you seen that has been able to grow?
Yeah. I mean, you're right. There's a lot of like low code, no code platforms that are trying to solve similar problems to Airplane. One example is like Zapier, right? Very different product. We don't compete with them at all, but it's like, okay, there's all kinds of people trying to connect Salesforce to Slack or GitHub to their email or whatever. And so they can just use Zapier to like kind of glue those things together and quickly create workflows with a lot less code than ever you do it internally. That's the exact sort of thing that like used to probably take an engineer writing some code and spending a couple of days on the problem. Now it takes 10 minutes in their platform. We're trying to do the same sort of thing with other types of internal tools. I don't know that there's like any specific advance that sort of led to all this. I think there's really two things that have kind of happened in the last like 10 years that have led to this. One is like there has been an explosion of SaaS tools. And so if you think about tools like Airplane and Zapier and all the rest of these low code, no code tools, they kind of fill in the gaps that dedicated SaaS can't fill in. And so 10 years ago, when there wasn't a ton of SaaS tools, in some sense, like you were a lot less productive, but you also didn't have as many of these gaps that could be filled in by software, right? And so I was describing like a billing dashboard that you might give to your support team or your sales team or something. That billing dashboard kind of probably lives alongside something like Salesforce, right? But if you don't have Salesforce at all, then you're probably doing everything in a manual way anyways. And so building an internal tool separately from that probably isn't your first priority. So now that we've bootstrapped all this SaaS, I think there's now this bigger landscape for some of this internal tooling. I think the other big thing is that almost every software product over the last decade has become a cloud product. And so I don't just mean like SaaS companies, but like if you think about how do you watch movies, you watch them on Netflix. How do you interact with your bank? You don't go to the branch, you log into chase.com or the app, right? And so everything's a cloud service, right? There's a client being served up to you via a website or a mobile app. And then in the background, there is some server farm somewhere with a bunch of backend software that's serving up that experience. And the nature of cloud software is it needs sort of intervention points that are not the user-facing software. So like, let's say you're logging into your bank account and you hit some problem, right? Like you notice that your balance, you made a transfer, but it didn't go through, whatever, right? Now you have to like call up your bank. And then when you call up your bank, you get routed to a representative. That representative needs to be able to fix the issue. When they want to fix the issue, they need to be able to like pull up your record and be able to click a button to like make your transfer go through or whatever. That software has to exist there to let them do their job. This is the nature of all cloud software. If you have a cloud service operating, there's going to have to be some sort of team on the other end, sales, support, customer success that serves that software and like fulfills those requests. And they need software themselves, internal software to be able to fulfill that. That wasn't the case 20 years ago. So if I ship you a copy of Microsoft Word on a CD-ROM and you install it on your computer, there's no like debugging I'm doing over the internet, right? Like you might call the support line and I might tell you, well, sorry, or like click this button and it'll fix your issue. But I don't need an internal tool to fix your issue, right? But now when everything's in the cloud, I do need an internal tool to do that. So I think that change has caused like a huge need for things like Airplane.
Yeah. I also think about just like the standard at which customers expect to have certain experiences or certain relationships with products or user experiences. It definitely caused a lot of this as well. I'm assuming just being able to have a modern consumer business facing aspect of your business, whether or not you're selling SaaS or not,
Yeah.
it like almost like table stakes. You have to
Yeah.
have kind of modern feel. And thinking about just like the changes and obviously in terms of changes for founders, like the velocity at which you can go to market is decreased. The time to go to market has decreased so significantly. What are, in your opinion, some of the challenges now that founders are facing that are more so amplified, being that go to market timeline? I feel like that was the biggest issue, and then now that's kind of almost closed. What are some of the bigger challenges that people are seeing now?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would say, honestly, this is one of the biggest changes from when I started Heap in 2013 to Airplane today in the 2020s. That, like, you're right, distribution is easier than ever in the sense of like, you can just publish a website and you can put things out there and there's all these Reddit and Hacker News and LinkedIn and Twitter and all these places to distribute your ideas. The flip side of that, though, is it's easier for everyone else too, right? And so in 2013, I remember when we launched Heap, we just put it up on like Hacker News and a couple other places and it like immediately went kind of viral a little bit and got like a ton of attention. We literally had over 3,000 people sign up for the product on like day one of launching it. And in retrospect, it was a really bad landing page with a really bad demo video. Like it was like not high quality. Whereas with Airplane, like we did not have that at all. We did a launch, we got a couple hundred people to try it out and stuff like that. But we had to really work at it to get people to try it out. Because even though it's easy to publish a tweet or even easy to put something out there, it is much harder to break through the noise because everyone else is doing it too. And so just having a cool idea, if you had a really cool idea 10 years ago in tech, at least, people would just pay attention. I remember people would go to techcrunch.com and like just read every new funding announcement because there weren't that many of them and learn about cool new companies and try out products that way. No one does that today because there's a billion funding announcements every single day. You can't keep up with all of it. And it kind of gets sort of boring after a while. And so if you have to build something truly special to cut through the noise in that way, or you just have to do the good old go-to-market techniques that have always worked around like sales and marketing and whatnot to get people to pay attention.
Yeah. And you know what's interesting also, and thinking about both products, Heap and Airplane, is this idea of like when you gain more or want more access to the platform, it's like you increase the tiers of you pay. I've never run a company that has that kind of pricing model, but one of the challenges for me is when I think about it is like, how do I make sure that everyone is getting the most out of the current tier they are? And how could I drive them to want more into the next evolution? So my question to you is what strategies or tactics have you been able to actually get people to start utilizing not only Heap, but also Airplane now and continue to grow upstream?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, that's one of the hardest things in SaaS. There are tons of companies where, they have these like tiered pricing models and they either struggle a lot to like drive people up through those pricing tiers, or they do it really successfully and it's very good for them. But it's like a huge kind of unsolved problem that every company struggles with and every company iterates on. I think I wouldn't say we've cracked the code at either Heap or Airplane. I think companies that have done it really, really well. I think Datadog is one that does it really well. And I think the way Datadog does it so well is you can start out using Datadog for almost for free. It can be really cheap on day one. You can get a lot of value out of it. And then it sort of uses this usage-based pricing that scales very quickly as your company scales as well. So you might be using it on day one as a startup, paying almost nothing, thinking this is a great tool. And then all of a sudden you start getting users and your Datadog bill kind of skyrockets. It also sort of, it's usage-based. So you keep like instrumenting more events and things like that in Datadog and you realize your bill sort of explodes, but you are getting value that whole time as your bill is exploding. So they've kind of developed this very nice sort of thing, which is very annoying for you as a buyer, but it's you kind of have to pay it in some sense where they're delivering so much value that you naturally want to use more of it and instrument more of it. And the pricing model is tied to the ways you use it in valuable ways. And so when it explodes in cost, you like get angry, but at the same time, you're like, well, it's kind of worth it too.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, really clever of them. Salesforce, I think they do a great job of like, they have a seat-based pricing model, which is pretty simple, but they also like have tons of features that they've built over 20 plus years of existing that now they know exactly what each type of business needs. And so you're a small business, they'll sell you this exact group of things. And then when you're like, oh, well, but I need more API credits. Well, I got to upgrade over here. Oh, now I need this thing. I got to upgrade over here. They sort of walk you up into their highest tiers. But part of that is because they've just been around so long that they have so much to sell you, right? They have like so many different features and functions, and they've tested it so much that they know exactly what you're going to end up needing at each stage. You just got to iterate on this stuff, I think, is the real answer, right? So I think with Airplane, what we've done, we've kept it really simple. Like if you look at our pricing page, it's not complicated what you get in each tier. We've tried our best to be pretty generous with all the tiers. There's definitely customers out there who are paying us only $10 a month per user and have told us like, hey, this product's kind of a steal. We would pay more for it, but we're getting all the value we need out of this set of features, so we don't feel a need to upgrade. And on one hand, that's a bit of a bummer, but on the other hand, we're an early stage company. And so we're happy to sort of get that learning, get that like evangelist for our product who's going to go tell 10 of their friends to go try out Airplane too. And then later on, when we're much larger, we can figure out how to optimize our pricing so that that customer would have upgraded more.
Yeah. And to answer like consumers' questions, I was like, oh, why don't you just offer everything? Just, I guess, briefly describe the amount of work that it just takes to offer these features, things that break that you have to fix. Like there's so much like dead and sweat that put into these to actually justify the cost of what you're offering. It's not just like it's not just like a prepackaged thing that runs on its own, right? It's a maintain.
Yeah. And to be honest, I think like most customers of a certain size, they don't want to pay nothing for the product, right? They want to pay something for it because they want things like you're mentioning. They don't just want a product that's going to like fall over and break all the time or something like that. They want guarantees it's going to be high quality. They want to make sure there's a support guarantee, all that kind of stuff. And so if you look at that, like whenever we talk to a company of a certain size, they're not even considering anything that's not like the enterprise tier, and they're usually happy to pay the price for it because they understand that they're going to use Airplane for some mission critical stuff, for some really important pieces of functionality in their company. They're going to want guarantees that it's going to stay up a certain amount of the time. They're going to want guarantees that if they run into a problem and they can get support in a certain amount of time, they're going to want guarantees that we're going to be solvent as a business, to be totally honest, right? Like if all of our customers use this for free, we're not going to be around very long. And
Right.
you don't want to bet on a piece of software and invest heavily into it, only to find out that they go out of business in 2 years. So I think at the end of the day, if you have a fairly priced product, you can charge a pretty high price and people will be not even just accepting, they'll be happy to pay it because they'll be seeing the value in it, and they'll feel that money is getting something real and tangible. It's not just an arbitrary number,
Yeah,
for sure.
that's one thing I think I have appreciated about SaaS. Kind of, I guess, it was around, but almost just like amplifying, which is the need to service customers and being completely customer oriented,
Yeah.
almost and almost walking through their shoes versus like transaction or commodity selling. It's really like along your journey, what can we contribute to the success of either your job or your business, which is extremely exciting. And I think it's one of the positives that's come out of businesses being built. But just to obviously talk about Airplane a little bit more, tell us a little bit about the traction you've seen thus far and what's pretty exciting about the next phase of growth that you're looking forward to.
Yeah, for sure. So we're still pretty early. The company's been around for a little over 2 years now. And so we've raised 2 rounds of funding, a little over 40 million total in funding. The team's about 25 people today. And so, yeah, we have a couple hundred paying customers, a couple
Yeah.
thousand free customers, things like that. We have a pretty generous free tier, so you can get pretty far, not even paying for the product. And then we have a few hundred people who are paying either on our self-serve tiers, a fair amount of people on our enterprise tier as well. And so it's kind of all across the board. There's sort of small startups using the product. There's larger companies as well. Most of our traction has been maybe like growth stage tech companies. So companies with maybe 200 to 1,000 employees, that kind of range where they're large enough where they are starting to see some growth pains around internal tooling and they need to build some of these internal systems, but still small enough where they maybe haven't overly invested into this stuff already. Sometimes we'll talk to a company where they're like, I wish I'd learned about Airplane 2 years ago, something like that. So that's kind of the sweet spot for us right now, but we do have some of those larger customers as well. So yeah, the traction's been great. It's been almost all inbound. So we launched the product almost 2 years ago, so July of 2021. And since then, yeah, it's been mostly inbound growth. We did an initial launch, we had a little bump in signups, and then we had a couple each day, and then it sort of has trickled up over time via word of mouth and then content as well. So a lot of people come discover us through our blog. We blog a lot about sort of things related to our product. So Airplane is it's kind of like you mentioned, it's sort of a unique product in that an engineering team will buy Airplane to solve a issue for another team. Like they will build like a sales dashboard or something like that. And so we write blog posts that are kind of about other ways to solve those problems, like other pieces of technology or open source solutions or things like that you could use to build these kinds of tools. And then people will find those blog posts via like SEO, like via search. And then they'll realize, like, as they're reading this tutorial on how to use Django admin or something like that, that they'll see at the end, like, oh, by the way, this Airplane thing seems like it might be a more interesting way to solve the same problem. So we get people through that as well. And so that's just worked pretty well for us so far.
Yeah, I love walking through the funnel. I could see it. I could see how it kind of leads into kind of the overall, and not only customer acquisition, but it's interesting to think about how your product serves for internal teams and thinking about how that decreases probably product attrition within teams and within companies. And I'm curious, like, what are some ideas that you have around like partnerships? I could see like accelerators being extremely exciting to partner with a company like yours because there's a lot of work that needs to be done when you're building that MVP, but not necessarily needs to be foundational when you're building and scaling your company, right? To find product market fit is a completely different ball game than kind of scaling. But yeah, what do you think about, or do you get excited about partnerships or ways that Airplane could kind of partner or attach itself to a vehicle and kind of grow it with something else?
Yeah, we started to explore that a little bit actually. So we've tried a few angles. The one that sort of worked the best for us so far is there are a number of like, so I mentioned before, something like 40 to 50% of the time that engineers are spending is building these internal tools. And so what a lot of larger companies do, they actually outsource some of that work. And so they'll outsource it to agencies that do like tool building, or in some cases, agencies that do like DevOps work or, or things like that as an outsourced thing, all kinds of stuff. People will have sort of like outsourced agencies helping them. So we found that some of those agencies like using Airplane to accelerate the value they're delivering to their clients. And so we've only done that maybe 3 or 4 times where we've like brought on customers through that sort of channel by virtue of like finding, like having an agency who tried out Airplane, liked the idea, pitched it to their client, and then was able to sort of like implement something at the client using Airplane. That's happened a couple times now, but it's something we've seen a little bit of success with so far. So something we're starting to double down on. So yeah, that's been definitely pretty effective for us.
It's exciting. Yeah, I've been big on kind of thinking about partnerships, things like that. Also, just like you even could probably partner with some universities to even get people on Airplane and maybe even learn some real skills. And maybe when they take it to the other jobs, I love tools where you learn and it enables people, because I feel that when you find that right channel, then the growth can really excel. And it's exciting to kind of see how that plays out within the right channels. But thinking about kind of external and internal, what are some of the biggest risks that you think the company faces today?
Yeah. I mean, I think like it's always hard to predict the future. I think like ultimately there are certain risks that are like running out of money, all that kind of stuff. I don't think we really have those risks. We're actually really well funded. We have a lot of runway, all that kind of stuff. For us, I think like the most likely risk is we have a certain approach that we're taking to helping people with internal tools. We're not the only ones helping with that problem. We have a very specific, sort of unique, differentiated approach. We think that's the reason people have come to us over more mature solutions and stuff like that. And we're so far the only ones really doing what we're doing in the specific way we're doing it, being very developer first, all that kind of stuff. I think the risk is that some up and coming startup comes and does like has an angle on the problem that is just better than our angle on the problem. And so I think this is what you kind of see in various markets. Like if you look at a company like Slack, before Slack, there were a bunch of other chat solutions and things out there. People use like Hip chat or IRC or Gmail chat or things like that to run their companies. But when Slack came out, it sort of just wiped out everybody all at once. And some of those companies had real traction. Some of those products had quite a bit of traction. And really what the difference there was like somebody found the right approach to that problem that was better than everyone else before. Obviously, if everyone knew that, they would have just been doing the Slack thing from the beginning. And so I think we feel really confident in our approach. We have really happy customers. They're very well retained. We've actually never had a single enterprise customer churn from the platform. Every single one has actually increased their contract sizes on renewal. We've only been around for a couple of years, so it's not a ton of data, but we have like all that stuff is great. But if someone just thinks of a fundamentally better way to solve the same problems, we're not going to be around for very long. So I think that's the thing we think about all the time. And so we're always brainstorming like, hey, is what we're doing the best way we could solve this problem? And we have taken things that we've built even a year ago and sort of tossed them out and said, hey, there's a better way to solve that now because we thought of a better way to do it, or some technology came out that enables a better way to do it or something like that. So you have to be kind of disrupting yourself at all times. And if you're not, someone else is going to do it to you.
Yeah, yeah. Well said. And if everything goes well, what's the long-term vision for the company?
For sure. So yeah, I mean, overall, the whole point of Airplane is to save developers time when they're building these kinds of internal tools. And so right now, there's a lot of stuff you can build in Airplane, but there's also a lot of stuff you can't build in Airplane. And so when we sell to a company, we're solving some of their problems. We're not solving all their problems when it comes to internal tooling. Over time, you want that proportion to grow. And the way we're going to grow that is we're sort of building more and more types of primitives and building blocks that let you build more and more unique types of internal tools. So for example, today, if you have like a script or something that's like a database query, you can model that in Airplane. But if it's something that requires like database storage or something like that, you have to sort of you have to sort of bring your own database and attach that to Airplane. But eventually you may have our own storage option sort of built into the platform. That's one example, but there's many other things like that. And the other thing is really just making that developer experience better and better so that when you're building stuff in Airplane, it should be as easy to do as possible, as fast to do as possible. If you're taking something that would be maybe 20 hours of work to do yourself without Airplane, and maybe Airplane can get it down to 5 hours of work, that's a big win. But can we get that down to 2 hours or 1 hour? Or can we like have a template out of the box that just does it for you? And so these are the types of things that we're starting to think about is like, how can we cut that time down more and more and more so that the proportion of the amount of work that we can automate for this sort of like back-end internal tooling work that you ultimately isn't moving your business forward, can we automate as much of that as possible? So like the long-term vision is like, can we actually automate away all this internal tooling work that's not differentiated so that you can focus on the stuff that really matters to your business?
Yeah. And also just enable, like, it keeps you, like, what you have to, in terms of like hiring, like, you can be so lean and so efficient with the right person who And I was looking at some of the technologies like TypeScript and React, things that people are using so commonly nowadays, where it's even that much more, gives you that much more ability to look like a mature company when, you're earlier on in your growth as a startup, which is so cool. I always like this next section. I'll call my founder FAQ. So I'm gonna hit you with some rapid fire questions
Sure.
and we'll see what we get. So first question, I always like to open it up. What's particularly hard about your job day to day?
Yeah, I mean, probably the same thing as it is for many other founders, which is just time management. There are a million things to do and only a few hours a day to do them. So being able to divide my time between people at the company, customers, recruiting, various back office tasks, whatever, that stuff.
Yeah, yeah. And thinking about just like what your airplane is able to do, what are some of the common things that companies are using or building within their organization? What's like almost like the standard? If I was thinking about like a starter kit, what am I building internally that you see kind of most common?
Like the things people build with Airplane, like most commonly. Yeah. A few things I'd say, like number one, admin panels. So like you want to have some sort of place for your customer facing teams to be able to like look up customer data, edit customer, like send someone's free trial, edit their billing data, all that stuff. Number two would be operational workflows around like data management. So like a GDPR deletion workflow, for example, if you need someone to be able to like click a button and erase a user's data, that's the type of thing you might model in Airplane. I'd say like number three, like sort of like onboarding workflows and stuff like that. So like, let's say every time you onboard a new customer, you have to do these five things. You have to spin up their tenant, import a bunch of data, whatever. You can sort of model that step-by-step workflow, multi-user workflows, permissioned workflows, all that in Airplane really well. That's maybe a top three, but the nature of Airplane is everything people build is very custom. So there's tons and tons of stuff that people are building on the platform.
Has anything surprised you?
A little bit, yeah. I mean, like I would say like a lot of people use Airplane for things that I wouldn't necessarily even have thought of as like internal tooling until people started building it things that way and then we started supporting it more. One big thing, one of the big use cases for Airplane is like scheduled operations. So if you're like, oh, every day I need to like send out an email blast to my users, or every hour I need to sort of run a payroll or something like that. That kind of stuff people will use Airplane for. We didn't even support that functionality in the beginning. People kind of hacked around it and we're like, okay, well, let's add scheduling. And now it's actually probably the biggest use case by volume of usage on Airplane is sort of scheduled operations.
Yeah, it's funny. Nobody's really like really kind of completed that. Like I use it for like I use like Mixmax even for sales and outbound, right? You use
Yeah.
like Max, use Apollo. There's so many other tools that you can use, but it's the timing of it. It's super important in the customization. So it's interesting
Yeah.
to hear that people are still looking to solve that problem. And thinking about your journey as a founder up to this point, what's something that you're really good at now that you wish you were better at earlier on?
Yeah. I mean, I like to think I'm better at hiring than I used to be. When we started Heap, I'd never hired anybody for anything. And we had to sort of made a lot of mistakes along the way and also had made a lot of really good hires, probably more by luck than by skill along the way as well. And I think at Airplane, we've been able to be a lot more skillful in sort of like assessing people and making sure we're doing so in an objective way and really getting a good assessment of their skills and things like that in ways I was just a lot more naive about 10 years ago.
Yeah, yeah. Is there anything you would kind of change or do differently in your past experiences as founder?
Nothing major, honestly. I think we were really lucky to get where we did with Heap. There's obviously individual decisions that in retrospect are wrong and things like that. I think like the big thing is like if I could go back and really like spend more time with our customers and understand them better and build features that were more customer oriented, I think that would have
Yeah,
probably saved us some time and gotten us to grow a bit faster.
yeah. On a personal note, what's something that you really enjoy doing? Is it customer calls? Is it building product? Is it talking to advisors and or fundraising? What's something you enjoy?
Mostly customer conversations. I think that's the main thing. I like spending time with our customers. I think it's never a waste of time to talk to your customers. You always learn something from it. Even when you think like, oh, this customer is already really happy. There's not really expansion potential in the account. Even when you start thinking in that way, and then you actually spend that time with them, you realize, wow, there's actually a lot to uncover here. And so there's just like interesting use cases and case studies and stuff like that you can learn and use it to inform the rest of what you do.
Yeah. What's one habit that you feel most founders should start building like today?
Yeah, I would say like have a really clear sense of what the most important two or three things that you're trying to accomplish like right now and like write it down somewhere, whatever to-do list on a piece of paper or something like that. And then just like look at that thing every so often and ask yourself if you're actually doing that. Cause it's so easy to get pulled in 100 different directions and realize that you've spent a whole week working really hard and spent zero time on the things you thought were most important. So I think just like have those things in the back of your head and like pull yourself away from getting distracted by other things.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a great point. I always like this next question because I love how founders extract knowledge out of anything that they ingest. Whether it's early in your career or now, what books for people have had a lasting impact on you?
Yeah, actually, honestly, it's a bit of a tough one for me because I don't read many business books. I don't think I've read a single business book in a decade or something. I think at one point I read High Output Management because someone told me to and it seemed fine. But like honestly, I think I get a lot more out of having conversations with people who've done it themselves and being able to ask questions. I just don't when I read a book cover to cover, I don't extract the learnings in the same way. Sometimes they have really insightful things to say. It just doesn't stick with me in the same way. For me, it's more about like when we were early at Heap, being able to talk to the people who were growing and scaling Segment or Looker or these other companies that were a couple stages beyond us and being able to talk to them and say like, hey, how did you solve this particular problem or whatever? And so that was the stuff I found really insightful for
Yeah.
me.
Yeah, so good, and it's so fun about the startup ecosystem, being a founder and grabbing advice and getting people's honest feedback. I feel like it's such an encouraging network and relationship that people have, and it's
For sure.
exciting. I think we're all just want to build cool stuff, and as long as you're not trying to build the same exact thing, I think we're all down to chit chat.
For sure.
Um, yeah, yeah. Well, Ravi, I know we're closing to the end of the show here, but last little bit, is there anything left on the table? Any question I didn't ask you that I should have? Obviously, we'll give you a chance for your plugs, but yeah, anything I didn't ask you that I should have.
No, I thought you did a great job kind of going over what I've learned over the last 10 years and things like that. Thank you so much for having me on.
Of course, Ravi, it's been such a pleasure learning about your early experience as an entrepreneur, learning about what you've learned, kind of growing and scaling Heap, how you've taken a lot of that into Airplane, but also just how you've continued to enable and keep people using tools that increase their productivity or deliver on things that are common problems. And really, it's exciting because it not only gives you a level of intelligence, but also helps you build more productive, more mature companies. So really excited to see what you're building and such a big fan. Last little bit, where can we find you? Give us your plugs. Where can we, is it LinkedIn, Twitter? Where can we find and be a supporter and a fan?
Yeah, for sure. So if you want to check out Airplane, it's just airplane.dev, DEV. If you want to look me up, I'm just on Twitter at Ravi S. Parikh. That's my handle. And then if you just like search for my name and Airplane or something, and then LinkedIn, you'll find my LinkedIn over there. But yeah, you can reach out to me wherever.
Amazing, Ravi. It's been such a pleasure chatting with you. I hope you enjoyed yourself on Behind Company Lines, and thank you again for being on the show.
Thank you so much.